the Green Party staged a photo op and wealth tax proposal outside the Treasury with the hopes of garnering media attention and to try and change the government's direction on the economy. The four MPs posed with a scale and talked about rebalancing the economy. This then coincided with a rally calling on the government to tax the rich. Speakers included Carla Denyer and Gary Stevenson.
15 years of austerity have driven our economy to the edge. And yet this government is doubling down on cuts, putting our NHS further at risk and making ordinary people bear the burden. This only increases the unfairness in the system. Greens believe it's not fair that the Labour government is removing vital support from 1 million disabled people.
By choosing instead to tax wealth fairly, the Chancellor could protect against welfare cuts and invest in the changes we so desperately need in this country. Supporting our communities, action for a safe climate, and getting our economy moving again. It's time to rebalance our economy for good and make people's lives better.
We're going to talk about that video in a second, but before that, Helene, I want to ask you, Gary Stevenson has been doing a lot of the media rounds. In fact, I finished his book, The Trading Game. I bought it a couple of days ago, blasted it in 2 days, and I'm a slow reader. Very, very good book. If you've not read it, please read it. It's fun. So we've got Gary Stevenson going on podcasts and stuff. He's calling for higher taxes on the rich. We have got the Greens campaigning on this. I know it's a policy that we're not surprised about. Ed Davey has been calling for a wealth tax, and now we have rallies. Is this a sign that the left is starting, dare I say it, starting to get his act together a little bit and making clear demands?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there is a broad support. There's like 70% support in polling, I think, from YouGov, if I remember correctly, in support for a wealth tax, you know? And I think that whilst there is plenty of problems with the way the public is viewing public spending as being moving from one place to the other, going, oh, well, you're taking money away from pensioners, giving it to migrants, of course. I think a lot of people just think that we need to be spending more on public services. You know, the biggest concern with regards with the members of the public have with the country, the NHS is right at the top. For every single cohort, no matter what voting cohort you belong to, apart from Reform UK, who care about migration slightly more, everybody, Tory, Lib Dem, Labour, Green, all of them care about the state of the NHS, and they want more money to go into it, and they want the economy rebalanced, as been pointed out in that little skit there. And I think that there is, because of the singular focus on wealth taxes, because it's very easy to get the point across. Remember that the right have been doing this for a very long time. Rather than trying to have a kind of more holistic prospectus for government that you get people to buy into, you choose an issue, you stick to the issue, and you drive it into the mainstream. You get the discourse, the posting to papers pipeline, right? Where you continually talk about it, you continually have this single thing. Because the Tories did it with Stop the Boats, right? The Tories did it so hard with Stop the Boats that there were fucking pogroms on the streets, right? Where people were chanting the words that the Prime Minister had stood on his lectern in the number 10 press office, right? That's what they did. It wasn't talk about the problems with irregular migration and how we... No, just Stop the Boats. 3-word slogan, get it into people's heads. Wealth tax now, 3-word slogan. It's gaining traction through its simplicity, and I think that's a good thing.
Whenever I make these arguments about we need to tax the rich, you know, we need to go after the billionaire class and stuff like that, you get most people say, yeah, great. But to pick up on a point you made, a lot of them still go, I'm against these cuts to pensions. I'm against these cuts to benefits and disabled people. We keep giving it to illegals. And it's like, you're so close. You're very, very close. And it's very hard to not get railroaded by that. I mean, for me, I feel like what works the most is kind of, I call it flooding the market, which is obviously try not to get too much into, well, you know, migration is good for the economy and this and that. I just kind of almost sidestep and say, just tax the wealthy. Just tax the wealthy. That'll pay for stuff. Because, you know, you don't need a political party to kind of concede on every ground. You can just flood the market with a populist message. So, I mean, what do you make of that? It is very difficult to try and get people away from being tribalist or tribalistic when it comes to migration and refugees, when they're so close to that populist message?
Well, I think, as you said, you've got to flood the market. I totally agree with that strategy, right? Hammer the wealth tax point so hard that you drown out the people talking about migration. I mean, it is, of course, ironic that the reason we do spend so much on migrant hotels is because austerity stripped away our capacity to process asylum cases. Because remember, right, we were processing double the number of asylum cases in 2002 when we had record numbers of asylum seeker claims in this country than we have been in 2023 with the next spike, right? You know, like it was very easy for us to process asylum claims back in 2002. I wonder what changed. Oh, yeah, we had George Osborne as Chancellor, you know? So it actually is a result of less government spending, the reason we're spending so much on migrant hotels, you know? But that's by the by. Either way, the public realm has to be strengthened. And one ways that you can do that is through wealth tax. And of course, it's not just about financing government spending, because of course that comes from the treasury anyway, and then you tax that back to reduce demand. Overall, what you want to do is reduce the wealth of the super rich for two main reasons, right? Is because you not only want to ensure that wealth inequality is not as bad, so they don't outcompete the poor for resources by buying up all the houses. You know, that's what's happening. You're renting off of rich people's kids, most people nowadays, you know, or just old people in general. And second of all, you want to take away their ability to be able to have control over democracy, buying our politicians, buying political parties, using their influence to direct public opinion by owning media companies, for example. This is a political and economic distortion of having the rich in your society that is completely outside of the realm of government taxing and spending, because you know, whether you're a Keynesian or you're a believer in modern monetary theory, like the concerns of having a group of super powerful rich people transcends both of these things. And that's another argument that's worth making with getting money out of the hands of the rich.
I'm sure most people watching are either familiar or have seen him, Richard Murphy. And also it relates to Gary Stevenson's book, The Training Game, because he talks about the big issue is inequality. And sometimes, and this is a question I got for you, because sometimes I make the argument and say, look, we need to tax the super rich so we can pay for public services. I know I'm not being completely honest, right? And someone with like MMT in their Twitter handle would be like, look, you don't need to say that, right? You don't need to tax the rich to fund it. You use taxes to pay it back, right? You've got we have a sovereign currency. But my question to you is very hard anyway, in a very right-wing ecosystem, going on right-wing media or not, and calling for high taxes on the wealthy anyway. I feel like it's kind of stacked against you, even though a majority of people who agree with you, to then go on and say, actually, basically, we have a sovereign currency. We don't need taxes actually to pay for stuff. We can pay for it anyway. And then afterwards, we claim the taxes back. Actually, higher taxes is more about reducing inequality than actually raising the funds. That's even harder to argue. Are you with me on this? Do you understand why John McDonnell in 2015, even though Richard Murphy criticised him for it, to narrativize it as a tax and spend thing, as redistribution, rather than kind of explaining the sort of MMT theory?
I don't know. I kind of flip between the two. When I'm making content, for example, I will usually make the point of saying, well, if you're looking at this from a Keynesian perspective, you'd say this. If you're looking at MMT perspective, you'd say this, right? I just think it's going to take a lot of educating of the public to understand, you know, how the treasury works. Most people don't understand how it works in a Keynesian perspective, let alone from an MMT perspective, you know? So I think it's going to be difficult to get people to believe it. But once you do, if you do get it into people, then the case for austerity goes away. No one can fiscal headroom themselves into being politically popular when everyone understands the function of the treasury and creating money out of thin air, you know? So I couldn't give you a firm answer on that one. I try and cover both bases myself, but I don't have a particular strategy that I favour.
Whenever we make these arguments, I see it on TikTok, and Gary Stevenson's doing really, really well. He's getting popular, but you always get that person who says, yeah, we tax the rich and they leave. They always talk about capital flight, and I'm trying to say, we're talking about wealth here. So just explain to the audience, again, I'm sure the audience are well aware, explain to people how we're talking about wealth taxes, we're talking about land value taxes. That isn't so much of a problem when it comes to capital flight.
No, so property taxes. I want to change council tax anyway. So people with huge properties pay way more, and people with like 3-bed detached or semi-detached houses in the north don't pay more than people in London. It's an insane system of property taxes, right? We should have a land value tax as well, and of course there are plenty of assets that cannot leave the country. for example, you own Chelsea Football Club, for example, you can pay tax in the UK as a UK-based club. Not a difficult thing to be able to tax, right? Capital flight on more intangible assets is difficult, but what you can do is you can do your taxes as windfall taxes, so they have no time to be able to prepare for the tax coming and change their place that they're domiciled, so they have to pay. You can do exit taxes, so if anyone tries to change where they're domiciled for tax purposes, you get to tax them when they leave to ensure they don't take money out. Switzerland has an exit tax right now. And of course, there is Norway of a successful wealth tax, Commentator James Medlock went through all of the numbers of the Norwegian wealth tax because it'd been widely reported, so much so by Elon Musk and people, that it's now in Google's AI analytics, even though it's untrue, this claim that they lost $500 million due to the wealth tax from Capital Flight, when this was just some nonsense maths that was done by one person at one newspaper that was incorrect because they didn't have the right figures and formula. So when you put the actual numbers in from the official government statistics, it shows that it did raise money when they increased it from 8.8% to 1.1%. And they didn't see a huge amount of capital flight, and it was to the left of the Laffer curve. So the idea that the capital flight is this big problem, well, first of all, there are ways you can mitigate that through a land value tax. No one can move the land of Britain out of Britain, right? That's always going to be domiciled to the UK. Property taxes on things that exist in the UK. Exit taxes to stop people leaving. And of course, you can follow whatever model the Norwegians have used to ensure that people who do stay get taxed in a fair manner with fair assessments.
Now, for those that know me, right, I support the Greens. I vote for them. I will again. And apart from a handful of seats, I do implore everyone to vote for the Green Party. You remember. However, right, I've got my criticisms of their communications. People also know that of me. And I can't help feel a little bit cringed out by this scale stunt. Right, they're still giving technocratic, nice people vibes rather than sort of aggressive populism. I'm sorry, but this is a very liberal Democrat thing to do. What are your thoughts? I mean, do you agree, or or actually, media attention? There's no such thing as bad press, right?
I mean, it's very Ed Davey coded. Let's be real, right? 100% Ed Davey coded. But the Lib Dems were successful at the election. They turned their 14% into 72 seats very efficiently. Or was it 12 or 13%?
Either way, they were very
voting,
successful. Though? Or do you think maybe it was
that's the point,
Davey
right?
was?
What I'm trying to say is that there are two different perspectives to this. One, people say, well, any publicity is good publicity, no matter how cringe it is. Even if it is cringe, it will get stuck in people's heads. And there was the argument I make, which was that, well, actually, I think it's the ground campaign in these seats that got the Lib Dems as successfully as they did at the election. Nothing to do with their Davey paddleboarding on the internet, right? Like, I think there are two schools to this argument. I firmly in them in this is incredibly cringe because they've been told. I think a lot of people in the Green Party have been told, get out there, be important, get the media to cover you. But when it's weird things, placing things on scales, I don't think that's the way that you're going to win people over at a time. But people aren't like mildly frustrated with the lack of endorsement of these policies from the government. People are angry, people are furious, people are upset, and people are depressed with the state of the economy. No one feels like the country is going in the right direction. You need to channel those feelings. And these kind of stunts, whilst they may work for Lib Dem voters, who are usually far more affluent, in fact, their biggest voting cohort is the people who earn £100,000 or more. Funny how they did so well in the Southwest. But that's not the same electorate for the Greens. They can't use these same tactics. What I am a bigger fan of is the tactics used by Greens Organise, who are a campaign group within the Greens Organise, who are a campaign group within the Green Party for a more populist message. A lot of us are eco-socialists. We're part of the eco-socialist wing of the Green Party. I'm a member of the party. I'm a member of Greens Organised, full disclosure, right? And we've just put out a campaign video the other day, which is focusing on the community in Dartford and Kent, and it's talking about real bread and butter issues, the lack of political representation, and trying to harness a more populist message to take the fight to reform. That's where I think the Green Party should be focusing. And you know what? If the leadership are doing a thing that appeals to more kind of liberal, progressive types that aren't as angry, who are a little bit more affluent, or in other areas of the country, more rural seats, that's all well and good. They have that strategy. They can absolutely go ahead and do that. But there is another cohort of the electorate who need a populist message to win them over. And that's what Greens Organises for. And that's what I would recommend people who want to support the Greens, but who want to support a more socialist populist message should get on board with as well.
That campaign video you're talking about, it was absolutely fantastic. You could have mistaken that as a Labour Party ad under Jeremy Corbyn, right? It was in left behind areas. It was very working class focused, and people want you to be angry with them, and I think when I see some of the leaders and they're like, oh, this is really really bad. I'm like, you don't seem angry because people want there to be with you, want to connect, emotionally, and I think when it comes to Lib Dems, they can be safe because they are seen as the safe third option. The Greens can't afford to be safe. I don't think anyway. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe they're doing exactly the correct strategy, but I'm seeing polls and only one or two they've broken double digits, but largely they're around 7%. I want to see it higher.
What's important?
Yeah.
What's important about these polls as well? I've been looking into the internal numbers in these polls very recently, and whilst the Greens have had an uptick in a couple of points or something like that, where the cohort of the electorate that's not being spoken to are non-voters, the politically disenfranchised people who didn't vote at the last election or people who haven't voted for a very, very long time. The party that's winning these voters is Reform UK, overwhelmingly so. And it's the Green Party that has the lowest uptake of these voters in current polling. This is a damning indictment of the current strategy. That the outreach is bad, the level of the ability for us to be able to get people to know who we are, name recognition is bad in the party as well. And that's how you're not going to be able to reach them unless you have a strategy that appeals to their interests. And that's what I think that the campaigns like Greens Organise is important to do. Because I think perfectly reasonable to say that there are some people out there who are progressive, who are on our side of the political spectrum, who are going to likely vote Green, who are amenable to voting Green, who couldn't be won over by people looking like proper politicians, and they say in the way the elected Green MPs do at the moment, right? I'm pretty sure these people do exist, but they're a small cohort, and it's hard to win these people over because they might already have a party political allegiance. Non-voters, they're like an untapped resource of future people who could be brought into the fold, but they need something that appeals to them specifically, and I think that's why there's more efficacy in pushing the message that Greens Organise are doing at the moment than what the Green Party mainstream are doing.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.